texted them that. Thanks for bringing it up. So I'm bringing Khaleesi from Game of Thrones. Do you know what that is? Okay, well, you can basically do whatever you want, or you can do something completely.
What would that show?
Well, she's known like as the mother of dragons, so you do like a dragon costume.
I'm gonna be a dragon.
Yeah, you could totally do that. Like that'd be awesome. I already like Pinterest like makeup ideas for dragons.
Okay, all right, guys, we're gonna get started. We've got Dr. Scott Davis there from the University of Richmond. He's ready to go, and we'll do our quiz first, and then we'll go off sailing. All right. So I'm gonna share the screen here. Okay, and I'll make a few notes here about Thursday and what's to come. I just sent you an email, a little bit about the paper, about Thursday. We're not meeting Thursday, but I'm going to send you a prompt to write on. I actually don't think it'll be a full essay prompt like I suggested in the email. I think I'm going to change my mind about that, try to pack in a little bit more stuff that you might read or watch, and then write paragraphs on that, okay? But we're not meeting Thursday, and you'll be getting your reading assignments via email for Tuesday, as well as what little sort of extra writing bit might be due on Tuesday. Yeah,
Can you resend the link to the Google Docs thing that has everything?
Okay, yes, I will.
Okay.
I will. I'll resend that to everybody. I'll invite everybody to that directory all over again. We've got all the PowerPoints in there from our previous, from my lectures, from Dr. Desjardins' lectures. We've got the notes and the readings that we've sent out there. I'm working on getting the videos, the recordings of our classes on YouTube. I'm having a problem doing that, and I'm working with Ustream to figure out why that is, but we're working on that. Let's see. Okay, on the research paper, to sort of restate things, what your goal is for the research paper, it'll be to write targeting 10 pages, 10 well-written pages, and targeting probably a dozen sites in there on your topic, on your topic of your choice that relates to the stuff that we've talked about in class. So it'll sort of be a hybrid paper where you're talking about concepts from class, right on through the whole course. The breadth that you can give to the concepts that we've been talking about, the more the breadth, the better, that relate to a given topic. And so, looking at Diogenes, it could be cooking and cuisine as an emergent sort of phenomenon. It could be something to do with medicine or health or biology or life. It could be something to do with culture or writing. It could be something to do with filmmaking or genres of art. It could be something to do with language, like we're talking about today. It's to get that synthesis, to give you time to go on your own, outside the syllabus, to find stuff that relates to your topic. And there's lots of stuff that's been written in a range of disciplines from the complexity perspective. So if you need help finding that, hey, Dr. D, I need to find a book on complexity as it relates to the humanities or to language or consciousness, or I'm interested in that, or racism or urban development, the evolution of cities, something to get me started. And there would be a lot of sites in that book. I can help you find stuff, okay? So that's at the end of the course. That's what you'd be handing in at the end of the course. Okay, so you want to sort of keep an eye out for that kind of thing. And I may be giving you sort of room to do that this next week, since we're not meeting on Thursday. Okay, any questions on that? Okay. All right, so today, Dr. Scott Davis, Philosophy, University of Richmond, and we'll be turning to him in a second. Let's take the quiz first. Okay, ready? Here we go. Question number 1. Donald Davidson argued there's no such thing as one of those. We read an exchange between two people in a play, one of whom was called that person said epitaph, but meant Davidson argues that we should use his conceptualization of what kinds of theories? The last example of something that could be misinterpreted was okay. Now, I forgot to give you questions on the TED Talk. Okay, I'm gonna give you some right here and now. Okay, just a couple. Okay. Okay. Ready? Open-ended. What did he look like, the speaker? What was remarkable about his appearance? Anything remarkable about his appearance? Okay, about his appearance.
I can tell you about his entire lecture. I don't
Really?
remember what he looked like.
You don't, anything? Nothing? Nothing that stood out? Really? Okay, well then you'll get the next one, Maddie. Don't worry. Okay. I'll give you another one. He said if he were to come back and drive, land in a time machine 50 years in the future, one of the questions he would ask right away would be about what?
Like the first one or one of the?
He said 2 of them, didn't he? Either one. He did say 3. Any of them.
Can we just
Okay.
pick one?
You can say one of the trivial ones. One of the trivial ones. I just want to see if you've watched it. Okay, he analyzed in depth. Okay, this is the third question in this series. Okay, he analyzed in depth A, the comma, B, the smiley face, C, slash, and that's it. A, the comma, B, smiley face, C, slash. Okay, that's it. That's it. Okay, guys? That's it. Turn them over, please. That's good. We're done. Okay. Now, Dr. Davis, I don't know how you would have done on the TED Talk stuff, but hopefully you might have aced that other stuff. Okay. And now we go over these, don't we? I forgot. We go over these, I forgot. All right, hold on. Patience with us, Scott. We're almost done. Okay, Davidson argued there's no such thing as language. We read an exchange between 2 people in a play, one of whom was called Miss Malaprop. And she said epitaph, but meant epithet. Epithet. He argues we should use what kinds of theories? Prior and passing. Yep. And the last example of what could be misinterpreted was, have you had breakfast? Very good. Very good. GG aced it, I think. Okay, good. All right, so let's get ready to take notes here. No PowerPoint or anything. We don't need no PowerPoint when we got philosophers on hand. Yes, Maddie.
Was the TED Talk speaker bald?
Sorry.
Was he bald?
No.
He was like almost bald, because that's what
What
I
did
wrote.
some of you put for that?
Collared shirt, not buttoned.
Yeah, I said he had a
No tie.
buttoned shirt.
Male collared shirt, not buttoned, no tie. Okay, that was good. I'm sort of surprised none of you said he was African American. Okay, good. Yes, yes. You should say that, right? Okay. Yes, there we are, Scott. You can see us now.
All right.
And try and get everybody there. How are we doing? Okay.
That's good to me.
Yeah, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
I can't see him.
Yep, so far.
Okay.
Are we
hold on.
ready to go here?
They're saying they can't see you very well, and Dr. Davis is a very good-looking man. You want to get all of it. That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Okay, I think that's the best we can do for visual. Okay, you good? Everybody good? All right, Scott. Welcome to our class. Take it away.
All right. Well, I'm really impressed that you guys understood much of anything as a day. That was hard, and not hard, but it presents Davidson the opposite way I'm at today. The 20th century, for much of Anglo-American philosophy, has been viewed as a century of the philosophy of language. And Davidson pretty much dominated the last third of the century in the United States. But it was only at the end of his career that he articulated this question about language and idiolect that's, I think, important to our larger study of complexity. Think of it this way. However it came about, we evolved to be a certain kind of creature. And at some point, our instinct for mimicry allowed the infants of the species to develop complex patterns of response to the rest of the count. And if you've ever had a kid, which I certainly hope that none of you have, or if you've ever had a brother or a sister, you may have watched this happen, right? Little critter comes out, you stick it on its back, it makes verbally inarticulate noises, and after about 4 or 5 months, it starts to mimic the noises that the parents provide it with, right? Mom goes, "Pee," for the first couple of, part of pee, but then it starts to go, "Buh." Yeah.
I just want to say, we can hear you perfectly fine most of the time, but at times it clips out, and so we miss some stuff. So for
Yeah,
example,
I don't know. I'm trying to stay in exactly the same place, sort of punching over the computer.
yeah, I don't think.
And just a function of our technology.
Yeah, yeah. But I wanted to say, guys, what I think earlier, Dr. Davis was talking about the evolution of human beings as creatures. I think he said creatures. I think you like to use that term, and yeah.
In any,
Yeah, go ahead.
we can't understand, just stop me and tell me and ask me what I said.
Okay.
Not a problem. I'm not going to give little room in the time for today, so we're not, I hope, crammed.
Good.
So, at some point, the infant begins to respond to the adult. At the same time, the infant beginning to start to do things, right? And within about a year, inarticulate, making what clearly sound like sentences. And in fact, they are sentences. They're part of that natural response that we have. We're shaped by the environment that we have, And the particular, I don't know what I call it, repertoire of sentences, repertoire of responses that that infant developed is unique to her. Davidson means by an idiolect. This unique form of verbal behavior is the idiolect, and it is in one way or another different from everybody else. And think about it. I don't know how you would level of diversity that is at seminary, but even Americans have different accents. They use different words for certain kinds of things. Someone like McWhorter, who did that TED Talk, not a philosopher, he could have noted that you can tell what part of the country people are from whether they call something a soda or a pop or a Coke. In some parts of the country, anything's a Coke. In parts of the country, it's a soda, other parts, it's pop. And these distinctions are true not only regionally, but they are frequently true even locally. There was what was it? A Big Bang Theory last night. I'm trying to remember. One person said, well, I think Sheldon said the word one way and Leonard said the word another way. And that was a very Davidsonian point that happened. Because the speaker employs it to communicate with others, most of these differences don't matter locally. And enough to get around with your parents, they pretty much say that all three of you speak the same language. And if your family is good enough to get around other people in your village, then everybody in the village speaks the same language, and so on, all towns to the country. But no individual speaks the same language in the sense that all those idiolects are different. Why is it not all those idiolects are different? Their primary object is patient and understanding utterances
Scott,
depends on.
can you say that? Can you say that again? I think you said. I think you phrased a question about idiolects, and then you went on and made a statement, and you cut out a little bit there.
I said. Let me expand on it a little bit. Given that all these idiolects are different, we might think that we should have problems understanding each other. But we don't, for the most part. I can understand with exceptions Southern English, and Southerners with rare exceptions can understand my combination of San Francisco and Manhattan English. The reason that we don't have a problem most of the time is we share a larger social world in which concern is recognized linguistically and non-linguistically. General information with just the way people do things in the world around us helps us fill in any kind of gaps that we might have. The speaker intends to be taken to mean what he wants to be taken to mean. And so we, this is the principle of charity, that was in those readings, we fill in whatever little gaps need to be filled in. And this depends on grasp of truth. So I've now worked backwards, more or less, from 3.4 to 3.3 of your little reading.
Now, and actually, Scott,
Yeah.
because what we read was the Stanford Encyclopedia entry, and so I don't think the principle of charity was in there, but I don't think. Do you guys remember it?
I don't know, it might not have been, I
Yeah.
read it pretty quick.
But it's really interesting because I want these guys to know. I'm writing that down. That's important to me, the principle of charity, because Scott, there's a very similar principle in ethnomethodology, the study of interaction in sociology, called the et cetera principle, where people fill in the sort of the gaps, and they sort of I don't know, when you say, well, things are pretty good, but you know, and you say it like that, you know, and you fill in the gaps that, oh, that must mean things are stressful and you're having some problems, and I take it's somewhat like that.
Yeah, it's somewhat like that in the sense that if we are going to treat these other creatures that we encounter in the world as members of the species, we're going to leave the extraterrestrial issues by the way for at least today. But if we're going to treat people as members of the species, then we're going to have to assume that they had an upbringing something like ours, and we're going to have to assume that they learned to speak in ways pretty much like we did. So that if there's some gap in understanding what's being said, we fill in the space without even thinking about it. And the last thing I said is that the ability to do this depends on our grasping the notion of truth. Now, early on in a lot of talk about Tarski and a lot of talk about T-sentences, we're going to leave that all behind for here, so don't worry about that. Just think the notion of truth. In his late work, Davidson typically says that my infant is going to achieve at least the basics necessary for understanding truth the first time he makes or she makes a mistake. Because the first time that you, as a little rudimentary explorer of the world, formulate a belief that goes wrong, you're going to be brought up short. So imagine that my toddler is in the learning stage and he's picked out orange, but he hasn't as yet differentiated between apples and oranges as fruits. And so he reaches for an orange rubber ball and puts it in his mouth and takes a bite out of it. What happens? Can't, right? It doesn't work, as it were. And so there is that conflict between a belief and reality. Even if you don't have the concepts of belief and reality in your vocabulary yet, that is the experience of this contrast between attempting to do something and being unable to do something. And as the baby gets older, and as we get to be, I don't know, 5, let's say, we get into the notion of us capturing that distinction between reality and mere belief. So imagine back when, I don't know, you were 7 and you wanted a chocolate bar. And so you took one out of the chocolate bar receptacle, despite the fact that you're going to have one before you finish, because you can see the chocolate smeared all over your face, right? Did you eat chocolate bar? Now, by this point, you've learned the concept of putting out your hand and getting spanked. You don't like that. But on the other hand, you know that mom told you not to eat the chocolate bar. So you say no, and mom says, "Is that true?" And you say, "Of course it is." And mom stumbles over your mouth. And unless you're a really, really precocious toddler, at this point you just fold and admit that you said what was not true. And you've now got the concept. It's been introduced in a thoroughly social way without any theoretical foundations at all. Little over 2,300 years ago, Aristotle, metaphysics, truth is following. To say of what is false that it is false, is that it is true, is to speak truth. That's all there is to it.
Okay, can you repeat that, Scott? You cut out there, and that's good old Aristotle. We want to get that.
To say of what not that it is false. To say of what is that it is true.
Okay.
That's the whole concept of truth in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 1930s, Tarski quoted that piece of Aristotle and said that's all about truth, to characterize truth in formalized languages. We're talking logic and higher mathematics. And Tarski then used that to generate a very complex set of relationships that came to be known as model theory, and I'm not a good enough logician even to attempt to talk about that. But in the 1960s, Davidson is looking at a dispute about meaning, and he says, why don't we solve this for ordinary languages the way that Tarski solved it for formal languages? All we need are indexes for time and place, and slowly but surely we'll build in mechanisms for tenses and things like that. And then we can perfectly describe any given language. This is the project made Davidson initially famous, and the one that occupies the first, I think, at least 2 sections of the reading you guys had. It took off on a life of its own and is now a kind of cottage industry for philosophical graduate students. But Davidson became interesting that didn't capture what was philosophically really important. What turns out to be philosophically really important is the notion of radical translation. So, imagine that I come to a river and I see a person on the other side with a nice 2-person boat. Okay, in my most friendly English, would you bring the boat over, please? But the person doesn't speak English. So what do I do? Consider around to the right. What do you do?
Okay, so what do you do, guys?
We gesture?
Gesture. Maddie says gesture.
Exactly. You gesture, you point, you do a variety of things that are attempting on your part to give the guy the idea, bring the boat over. And remember, go back to of babies learning language. If he's learned language pretty much the way that you've learned language, to you certain kinds of desires, and then to your language certain sorts of intentions, and depending on whether or not he thinks you're good or not, he'll bring the photo. Radical translate. And even though we don't as yet speak the same language, we have to communicate. Lauren, you're looking puzzled.
Well, yeah, I'm sort of translating that into my own understanding, so is radical translation translating a statement into a very dissimilar communication system?
What radical translation is doing is read your intention.
I missed those two words. What did you say?
It's reproducing your intention for the other person.
Oh, okay.
Right? The reason thinking about it, the reason that we call it triangulation is because each speaker has the world and himself. And so if you draw in between the world and each speaker, then you've got a triangle, and the two speakers are working around that triangle to try understanding of the other.
So it's whether you're practically successful, right? Whether you've been successful in creating an outcome.
Exactly.
Okay.
Understanding, and this goes exactly to my next point. Understanding depends on two people responding successfully to a shared world. It's the assumption that each is a rational agent, and there we've got charity again. And this implies sharing belief about the world and each other. Notice that they don't have to share every belief about the world and each other, just rather a large number. For example, I look out on this classroom, even without having been introduced to students, they are all assumed that they're all either male or female, or at least at birth in one or the other of them. And they have achieved some degree of education. I even believe that they all speak English. But that's not a belief I can take into radical translation. Given all those beliefs, I have a lot of shared expectations and mutual knowledge. I know that none of them is going to fly over the river, for example. I know that it's very unlikely that any is going to suddenly start playing guitar unless you've given them a perverse signal. And all of these things need to interact in a simple, fairly straightforward way. Now, notice that if this is true of me in the class, then it's true of me and the people in the Berlin train station. And so when I went into the Berlin train station a couple of months ago, before I found I spoke English, I looked around, I took what little German I could and translated the signs. I found the one that had an arrow pointing in a particular direction. There was another arrow that said, well, pointed to a little push thing, and when you pushed it, the little cards came out of them with numbers on them. And so, son of a gun, if I didn't figure out where I was in the queue, connect my number to the numbers that were flashing on the board, go up to one of the windows, mine isn't good enough to explain what I wanted. The other German-speaking person pulls in the person who has English. Same thing could have happened to me, although I wouldn't have needed to worry about the language. Same thing could have happened to me in France. Same thing happened 2 or 3 years ago. Part of what this means is that even though the actual spoken languages are different in these different parts of the world, being a human language requires that they all share qualities or certain properties. It's slightly more topical, I'm trying to avoid that, that presuppose that we all have grammatically the same world. And not only that, but those beliefs have to be true. This is a point that drove Davidson's readers crazy for the first 2 decades of his work. Think about it for a minute. Most of our beliefs have to be true. Somebody to the left of Professor, those guys. Why do your beliefs have, what do most of your beliefs have to be true?
Somebody over here on my left. What the question is, why, is this your question, Scott? Why is it that most of our beliefs have to be true?
So we can function with the people around
That's
us.
it.
So that we can function with the people around us.
Did you hear that? So you can function with the people around you.
Exactly. That's exactly it. If they weren't true, then you would constantly be bumping into problems where the world frustrated your activities. The fact that we are able to continue and fairly successfully negotiate the world means that the vast majority of the beliefs that we share have to be true. And this turns out to be a dramatic, important fact. Because on the one hand, it means that there are no untranslatable languages. And this means that there is no problem of solipsism, the idea that somebody could be hopelessly trapped in his own life without being able to get it. And it means that the traditional philosophical problem of skepticism doesn't have any traction. That's a lot of payoff for one analysis.
Well, okay, Scott, let me, and I'm gonna put the computer up here on a little pedestal so more people can see the little tiny screen. It occurs to me that that's more visible to you. I'm also gonna plug in the power thing. I'm worried about the battery going down. But let me ask a question on this. When you say most of our beliefs have to be true, and Davidson was saying that, and that's the point that drove people crazy, right?
At least,
Yeah.
yeah.
My question is, what about beliefs that are sort of private, you know, like religion?
Okay.
And a lot of us believe very different things. And, well, I suppose some of us are wrong, right? But it doesn't matter.
Lord,
Sorry, am I breaking up?
Yeah.
Was I breaking up there? Did you hear me?
Yeah. No.
Okay, sorry. Well, let me try that again. I think I fixed our thing. My question was, what about beliefs that are religious beliefs, and where we can't all be right on those? Some of us are going to be right, and some of us are going to be wrong. But it clearly doesn't matter as we interact with each other what we believe. Often our political orientation doesn't matter either. We get along just peachy.
That's right. Certain beliefs that we have to assume are true are the very interesting ones, for reasons that about it should become obvious. The beliefs that have to be true are the ones that successfully allow us to negotiate the world day in and day out. The beliefs that we're interested in are the ones that generate conflict and commitment.
Okay.
But one of the things this means, for example, is old-fashioned pagans like me and serious Christians or Muslims or Hindus don't live in vastly different worlds. We just have a particular set of beliefs about which we disagree. But if you read the origins of the Idiolect, that shouldn't suppose if everybody has an individual Idiolect, there's likely to be all sorts of particular things about which we disagree. And if mom and dad thought that a couple of beliefs were really important, like we go to church on Sundays and Wednesdays and use certain kinds of language, and we don't engage in certain kinds of behavior, those parts of your are going to end up being more important to you than, beliefs about whether or not pines are evergreens or wood is medium hard compared to steel or any of the other little things. The car is in the driveway. Now, if you went out and saw that the car was not in the driveway, that would suddenly be, but that's not a complex metaphysical problem. That's just a problem of somebody stealing your car. About that, what do we do when somebody steals the car?
We call up.
We call the cops.
Yeah. Now, Scott, I want to pause here, guys. When we're talking about beliefs that have importance, right? That's like what I was talking about the other day with things that are important to us are those with frequency, stability, and impact. And this would have a lot of impact. If something is, whether you drink before you're 18, you're going to be thrown out of the family if they catch you drinking before you're 18. Or dancing, I think about Footloose or something like that, from our era. But those are impactful beliefs. And likewise here, those are beliefs with consequence for the communities that you're a part of and you're operating within. Right, Scott? What's that?
Back. I believe that we have a question in the back.
Oh, do we? Well, yeah, Diogene, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so is that why it can be hard for some people to adjust to like college classes or different courses, such as different, like such as a philosophy class or a different type of religion class? Is that why it would be hard for some people to adjust to that?
Is that why it can be hard for people to adjust to certain college classes where
It causes you to think differently.
it causes you to think differently?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I would think that's all. That's why it's an adjustment when you're going from culture to culture. I mean, it's the same sort of thing.
Sure.
right?
Yes. And think about the ways, even if we're not talking about religion, about the ways in which someone's taken aback by other people's food. Now, in my family, we're food cosmopolitans from an early time, so I didn't worry about, you know, sushi and sashimi or snails or any of those things. I eat those with great relish. As a matter of fact, for lunch today, I had octopus, which was broiled with a propane torch and then run under boiler to just take the edge off some garlic.
That sounds delightful.
That's
Hold on.
One of those people out there is finding that's sort of scary. But it doesn't change any of the other beliefs that we share together.
Right, and sometimes somebody seeing you eat something weird can break you off from the community. But
Yeah.
a lot of times it's something that you do in private and nobody knows, just like sort of your religious practices or something like that.
This is true. And this is also why, to make things just a little more squeamish, that the beliefs and practices that we have about sexuality tend to make conversations nervous and difficult, at least at some point in time. Typically wants us
We got another
do it.
question, Scott.
Yeah.
Speak up loud so maybe Scott can hear
You
you.
mentioned like certain sexuality. It's kind of like how where I'm from, they say you don't talk about politics, race, abortion, or sexuality because those are conversations that can either go like all the way wrong or all the way wrong.
Right. Z was saying. So sometimes you get the advice you don't talk about politics, religion, and what she was told, abortion or sexuality, because if you do, you could fracture your community, right? Your little or your clique, your conversation.
Even among academics who are philosophically inclined to enunciate views about abortion in 21st century America can lead to the end of a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a seminar up in Annapolis 2 years ago, and questions of abortion came up, and this one guy, not lost, and he was somewhat conservative, not a 60s Californian like myself. And all he did was say, don't want to talk about it, won't talk about it, won't talk about it, and the conversation came to an end.
And I just want to point out, my brother academic, okay, that Scott said even in academic forums or communities, you'll find that, and I guess what I'm trying to do here is state the importance of tolerance for different points of view to academic discourse. So that's why professors are generally sort of surprised when somebody says that, right? I mean, our bonds, our intellectual bonds in faculty, as faculty and as members of the academy, is that by God you can pretty much talk about anything as long as it's not personal, me or you.
Right.
I'm just getting on my soapbox, I guess, a little bit there.
This is why, I don't know if Professor Demarath shared with you my, albeit partial syllabus, but this is why, reading these issues, there's a movement from knowledge of the world, science, to knowledge about language and society, what we're doing today, to conflicts about issues of ethics. Because all of these intersect in places like the university classroom, but they intersect in ways that can't be predicted, can't be avoided, and don't provide of any algorithmic solution. Back in the 18th century, philosophers and scientists and everybody else who seemed to be thinking about these things thought that if you could use the perfect algorithm, perfect set of equations with the appropriate set of variables, that you could actually know everything about the past, the present, and the future. That's not true, and I don't think anybody believes that much these days. But part of what Davidson implies is that even if you did know all of those things, you still couldn't predict how we would resolve our ethical, political, and religious disagreements, because the standards and norms that we bring to those are all part of that idiolect, which begins when we develop language in the family and then is systematically modified in unpredictable ways as you go through life. So that at every point.
Sorry, Scott, there's just something that I keep getting this video message from Skype for some reason. Somebody wants me to hear a message on Skype. I keep having to jump up and shut it down. This never happened before. Sorry.
This is also one of the reasons why I am a technology Luddite. We'd rather have him spend much more money and fly me out there to do this than just do it over the computer.
Oh, brother, if I had the money, you'd be here. That's right. Absolutely.
In any event, imagine Idiolect as a kind of history of your life and a history of the norms and standards that you've exercised as you've pursued a different set of goals over time. So it may have been the case, for example, that when you finished being homeschooled, and this might apply to somebody in the room, I have the faintest idea. When you finished being homeschooled, your parents recommended that you go off to an evangelical, let's say one of the fine evangelical institutions in this country, Fuller. Actually, it's a theological seminary, so you'd have to go to someplace else first. But then you discovered an interest in American religious history and decided to go to Princeton because that's where the best American religion historians were. You might show up in Princeton, a long-time, well-formed evangelical, and suddenly realize that your language didn't match the languages of the other people around you. And that might lead you, it doesn't have to, because all of these things are unpredictable. That might lead you to rethink your status as a Christian. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to give it up, but maybe you decide to become an Episcopalian. And then that you begin to study your previous evangelical history and the history of evangelicals in the United States. And maybe because of your connection, particularly impressive, and lo and behold, somebody makes a PBS documentary out of it. And that, of course, is nice because, it helps your academic career. And you go through the rest of your career, and after you've had a couple of kids and a divorce and some other things, you're rethinking your connection to evangelical Christianity. Now, what I just described was a partial life history of my office mate in 1985.
Wow.
And I'm not going to give you his name. He's become a very famous academic, teaches in...
Scott, what fun are you? Come on. It's okay, it's okay, it's all right, it's all right.
It's a guy named Randy Ballmer who has actually just taken a job up at Dartmouth.
Good, okay, thank you.
So fun, I'll tell you.
Tells you these things themselves, so it's not that I'm releasing anything.
Right.
But wonderful guy, absolutely wonderful guy. And watching these transformations is watching the language that is closest to him change and be changed. And it then allows me to watch how he changes the world around him in different ways. And we're going to be the same when it comes to anybody else. Another thing that follows, Lauren.
Yeah, Scott, it's interesting because where I thought you were going with that, when he arrives at Princeton when he shows up there and discovers his idiolect, or you said his language, but his idiolect doesn't match that of others, and it causes him to change his sort of religious orientation, become Episcopalian. I was thinking that it would cause him to adjust his understanding of what his idiolect meant, and sort of what sort of religious language means. I mean,
Go ahead, finish.
Well, I mean, I once ran into an Episcopal priest on the streets of Little Rock at a sort of a festival thing. Young guy, young, cool, hip-looking guy, and I said, you know, my dad's roommate was an Episcopalian priest. He once said, yada yada. He loved the work and everything. I think I might love the work too if I could just take the whole thing as a metaphor. I could use a lot of. I don't know, I was just saying, I think I could buy in more if I could use the language metaphorically, seeing God as love, Jesus as life, or whatever. And he said, I can promise you a lot of Episcopalian priests do. And that sort of, but they might not have always done that. They might have arrived at Princeton one way and then held on to the language, but it becomes the meanings underneath it shift, if you will.
Or just to leave out the problematic term meanings, the way that certain words get used.
Right. Right.
I think that's perfectly plausible. Notice that he also could have dropped out of Princeton's graduate school and gone somewhere else.
Right.
We don't know at the time, because at the time, that's him making a decision based on the standard desires and expectations that he now holds. And that's what ethics is about. We negotiate those decisions about relationships with other people based on our shared knowledge of the world, each other, and the norms that we want to protect. So that's why, on my reading of this material, all of these things, from science to language to ethics, shade naturally into each other. And just to pick up on one more point, because they're not predictable and because they depend on the individual norms that people bring to their choices, an identical view that has to trump every other view. Yeah, Lauren.
I think you cut out just at the beginning of that. If you could just reiterate that statement, that sounded very important, but we missed the beginning.
Well, let's see if I can find it.
Yeah, sorry.
because of these differences, and because nobody can attain a neutral perspective, that is to say, a perspective that's above the fray, There is going to be no algorithmic way to satisfy which of our hard claims are true. We all have to agree about the vast majority of our claims, just to negotiate the world together, as our colleague there on your left put it earlier. But the ones that really interest us, the ones that we really care about, there's not going to be any straightforward way to verify or falsify those claims. Now, there should be an obvious response here. Lauren?
Well, I'm just, it sure sounds like then, and maybe I'm being too cute here with the term relative, but that truth is relative because it's relative to your relatives, your family relatives, and your communities around you, right? So going back to what Z was saying about not wanting to disrupt those communities and so on.
Truth isn't relative. Truth is just truth, right? Either God exists or God doesn't exist. Either I'm going to hell or I'm going to spend a happy life eating and drinking until I keel over dead. Right? Who knows? But how we respond to the things that we believe is shaped by certain radical social constraints.
So truth is conditioned in terms of how much it matters or something.
Truth is just truth.
Truth, yeah.
Right. Davidson at one point goes on for about a paragraph in one of his later articles, says, anybody that wants to say, and then he just lists a bunch of things, and he says, I don't want to hear about it. Truth is just to say if what is, that it is, and if what is not, that it is not. So, any indicative statement is capable of being true, and we have to investigate the world and everything around us to determine whether or not we're going to believe it.
Okay, but
and
this is why philosophers are so much fun. They'll always play with you, right? I mean, we can go on and on with Scott. He's game. But Scott, is it then what I'm maybe getting at is how much something matters in your community. That's relative.
That's going to be relative.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's very relative. And so there are falsehoods. Well, there are falsehoods that don't matter to you, and truths that don't matter to you. Right? Yeah.
I mean, let's put it this way. The laws of Manu don't matter to me. For those of you who don't know, laws of Manu are codified books of religious duties and obligations, really social duties and obligations, that emerged in ancient India in, I think, the first centuries of the Common Era, right? It's got lots of things that you're allowed to do and prohibited from doing. The Hebrew Bible has 300 or 613 commandments. That's always one of those things you like to do with students in early ethics course. How many commandments in Hebrew Bible? 613. They tell you a lot of things that you are required to do, a lot of things you're prohibited from doing, right? So, I had octopus for lunch. If I was an observant Jew, no octopus. Why? Because God says in Leviticus, no octopus.
Oh, really?
He doesn't actually mention octopus. He just says, you're going to eat it, and it lives in the sea, it's got scales, and it's got a swim. And octopus don't have scales. Right?
Wow, so
Sharks are not kosher either, by the way.
And crawfish, here we are in Louisiana, so crawfish.
Crawfish, not kosher.
Yeah.
All of those things I don't care about but I'm not a member of the community of God's chosen.
Mhm.
That's too bad for me, maybe, but on the other hand, too bad for the opposite.
Yeah.
Now, Christians are in an interesting situation because as the Christian Bible developed, it emerged, or the interpretation emerged was that he takes the 613 commandments of the Hebrew Bible and reduces them to two. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, that would seem to give you a lot of leeway. And that's probably why we have so many different forms of Christianity. Because the various Christians kept disagreeing about how they could interpret what they were required to do and what they were prohibited from doing. So right away, you had a break with the church in Jerusalem and the converts that Paul was making in the diaspora. Right? Paul is going out there and converting all of these non-Jews. Israel are saying, oh, wait a minute. We don't know if we want these guys to come in here because, they're not getting circumcised and they're not, keeping kosher. Paul essentially saying, well, that's not my message. And so you have that break, it gives them. Okay? Other breaks happen, so we have Coptic Christians and Eastern Christians of various sorts, and then the Latin West becomes stable for a fair amount of time. In the 18th century, all bananas. We have almost 200 years of those guys killing each other until they decided they could work it out. Right? It's in many ways easier it was.
What was that? What was that summary statement you just made?
In many ways, life is easier if you got more law. But part of the development of at least the European intellectual world since the 17th has been to call many of those laws and many of those religious traditions into question. And this is why, going back to that, there are so many things produce conflict in the modern European and American world. Intellectual conflict in the European and American world, despite the fact that we all pretty much believe the same things. How we doing?
Good, good. Hey, Scott, now that we're on to this is a great moment now for a number of reasons. I mean, when you say life is easier with more laws, one of the big questions in complexity studies is, when is it good for the whole network, to in a sense, to branch off and specialize and sort of make laws and boundaries and segregate and segment and compartmentalize? And when is it good for the whole, like Christianity, and when is it let Christianity proliferate to generalize and sort of allow diversification and to be more open and tolerant? So that's a key issue. And go ahead. Just your thoughts on that.
Well, one of the things, and this is why I wanted to make the transition from language to ethics here, presumably in complexity studies, if you're dealing with, let's say, non-human determinate systems, those systems don't have any opportunity to decide that they don't like socially or morally the way that things are headed. But when you're dealing with rational agents, they can stop anywhere and work up the way things are headed. And that's going to defeat any kind of deterministic system, even a complex deterministic system.
Humans making that choice and saying they don't like something will what?
Will make it impossible for their behavior or their collective behaviors to be fully captured by any complex deterministic system. So the humans are ultimately even going to defeat chaos theory.
Because
the chaos theory applies to deterministic systems.
Because they're so unpredictable? Is that what you're saying?
Well, they're perfectly predictable. I'm predictable. I'm as predictable as hell. You know, it's getting late here. It's time for me to have a glass of wine and maybe something to eat. And this is true every day of the week. Now, it's not a matter of predictability, but it's a matter of science. Think of it. We're all familiar ceteris paribus clauses in social theory and psychological theory, right? All things being equal, this will happen.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to human beings, rational, normal human agents, the paribus clause is this will be what he does unless he decides to do something different, which of course can't be a scientific law of any sort.
Okay, but I guess you and I, when we were having a conversation recently, sort of came up with this, came to this sort of a bit loggerheads on this. Why, you know, when you're talking about the billiard ball universe and how that can't exist, and I guess
it can't be an adequate model for any system that involves free human agents.
But you're separating. You're separating human agents from every other kind of agent because they're conscious and self-reflective, or is it the
when push comes to shove, I'm going to say that there is a gray area. That there are certain terrestrial species that we direction as humans, but for one reason or another didn't make it as far as we have, or didn't make it that far yet. It may be because of other aspects of physical. It may be because of limits in their neural capacities. But think of that poor octopus that I ate for lunch. It had an enormous, complex neurophysiology that extends not only through its cerebrum, but down through its tentacles. There are neurons firing in the octopus have developed some fairly amazing problem-solving strategies, right? If you don't have a skeleton, you are fairly susceptible to being attacked. But octopus can pick up things on the floor of the sea and themselves the equivalent of little houses to hide in. We all know about whales and dolphins. We all know about bonobos and chimps and those guys. Part of me that wants to say that we could, in principle, talk about them as heading toward agency. But I'm going to restrict agency to animals which can communicate with each other, formalize plans for the future, and then act on those plans. And the only species I know that can do all of that is us, even though these other guys sort of on the gray area.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a gray area.
Yeah. I'm not sure how I would feel about being served quail. Because the whales are a little bit more, think about whales, and flipper, it would be hard to eat flipper. The octopus, I'm pretty okay with the octopus, but I didn't know it personally. A chicken, I can eat a chicken any day of the week. So,
Well,
these are distinct. Language.
Your communities are depending on you to eat chicken. They're sure not to eat dolphin. So, it's.
Yeah, some people eat dogs. Some people eat dogs.
Yeah, that's right.
I've never eaten
Those are different
dolphin
communities.
or dog.
Scott, we got a break. I got to let you get to your glass of wine because it's it's already 5 o'clock in Nova Scotia if it's not in Virginia yet. So, hey
So
man,
how did this go? What do you?
I think it was great. I think next time, because I don't see you again for till later on in the course, formally, but I think we might want to use Skype because with Steve Desjardins, Skype was clearer. It was a better, and it may be our connection, maybe your connection at Richmond or something like that.
Well, I was planning to do it in the office, but I discovered yesterday afternoon that my monitor in the office doesn't have a camera, so I had to come and use the old computer at home. But for the next time, I can arrange them to get me a better system. I just have to put it in advance.
Okay, good, and we'll test it out. All right, thanks y'all, and thank you, Scott. Thanks, man. We'll be in touch. See ya. All right, guys, thanks, and I'll be in touch with you via email. And swimmers, I have a question for you.
Yes.
My daughter wants to know. So here's her situation, okay? Tomorrow, it's her last chance to qualify for state.
Uh-huh.
Right, she hasn't been swimming that much lately this year. Michelle?
It's an extra credit thing.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
And, so am I keeping you late?
A little bit.
Okay. So, she's got